All right, so we're just going to get started now. But before we get started, I just wanted to share a few notes on accessibility for this event. Automated closed captioning is available for those who need it, and you can turn it on or off by clicking the CC button on the bottom of your screen. This program will be recorded and made available for all registered attendees after the event. If you have any questions during the program, you can drop your questions in the chat or Q&A box at any time, and I will vocalize them for you. Just remember to set your chat to everyone so we can all see your questions. But that being said, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maya, and I'm a lead educator at Poster House, the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. I also lead the museum's CMYK Council, which is Poster House's advisory board of BIPOC artists, designers, and creatives who work to make the museum more inclusive and accessible for racialized communities. This year, the CMYK is proud to announce a new series of programs that highlights Poster House's permanent collection, which is comprised of over 10,000 posters. With this program, our aim was to continue to expand diversity while taking a critical and academic approach to the posters in our own collection. The partners we collaborate with start from our collection and then add ephemera from their own expertise to present a new perspective on poster history. With that, as you are all so excited, I am so excited to welcome you to Stick More Bills, an analysis of Indian posters in film, politics, and beyond. And my absolute honor to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Shiva Nallaperumal, who is a graphic designer, art director, and typeface designer, and co-founder with Juhi Vishnani of the plural design practice November. In 2017, he was selected as one of Forbes India's 30 under 30, and in 2019, inducted into the Alliance Graphique Internationale, AGI. Then we have Priya Prabhakar, who is a tenant organizer, researcher, and filmmaker based in Oakland and originally from Chennai, India. She's previously curated for South Asia art, highlighting poster design and visual insignia of radical street theater in Delhi. And last but not least, we have Somnath Bhatt, who is a designer, artist, and writer who lives between Ahmedabad and New York City. His work has been shown at MoMA PS1, and some of his clients include Instagram, the New York Times, Reebok, Hyunseo, and the musicians Nicholas Jarre and Mitski. He is currently an independent art director at Bloomberg. Without further ado, I present you all to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Should I just go ahead and share the screen?
Yeah.
Sorry, notes came up. Cool. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, and can everyone hear us as well?
Perfect.
Cool. I want to start. We begin our talk by acknowledging the ancestral and unceded lands of the Ohlone, Lenape, and Algonquian people's land on which we learn, make, and design today. Our deepest thanks to Poster House, Maya, and Salvador for inviting us, and the CMYK Council, and to all of you who are present tonight. I'm extremely delighted to be here tonight and sharing with Shiva and Priya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just want to disclaim this talk, as always, by noting that we're designers, makers, and organizers, and not historians. So this won't be a comprehensive historical view, as there's so much regional poster history in India that has not been archived. So I think the task before us is coming out of this event is the ability to be able to define history, not necessarily as just a chronological set of events, but understanding history as a series of gaps. And these gaps hold so much potential, knowledge, and incredible complexities that have yet to shed light on. And this is just one step in that endeavor. I want to share a Walter Benjamin quote. Every image of the past that is not recognized by the present as one of its concerns threatens to disappear irretrievably. And this is why we're really indebted to the work of archivists and historians and all the known and unknown makers of these works, as those are the people that have made our ability to show you these materials possible today. So I'll just pass it to Shiva to talk about linguistic plurality.
I just want to add that through this presentation, we also want to show that graphic design history is not a linear one, as always shown in the Western canon, as a series of movements that led to modernism and postmodernism. The posters that we're showing today are from the 1900s all the way till this year. So, and you will see that the progression of graphic design principles is completely different. And aesthetic considerations are very unique to the region and the sociopolitical contexts. Speaking of which, one of the major, a disclaimer sort of, or a sort of brief introduction to what we're dealing with in India is the most linguistically plural country in the world. Not just country, but the land itself. We have 9 official scripts and thousands of dialects and hundreds of languages. And so what happens is almost each state has its own language and culture, its own food, its own fashion, and more importantly, its own publications, its own film industries. So what this does is poster design then gets distributed among language, among cultural contexts, culture-specific symbols and colors, and so on and so forth. And so when we talk about posters in India, we're really not talking about one style, where we're talking about hundreds of different styles and different aesthetic considerations. And one state's posters may differ completely radically from another state's posters. And
I want to add that the exploration of Indian poster history is informed by a broader framework of analyzing visual culture in Indian society. And during this presentation, we specifically want to function through the lens of these 3 questions. First question is about tradition. How does this artistic production withstand the test of time? Number 2 is sponsorship. Who selects and funds these artistic productions? And the third is faith. Does this practice, does this artistic production carry a religious significance?
Yeah, and for this presentation and exploration, we're going to borrow the framework of Tasveer Ghar, which is a digital network of South Asian popular visual culture. I highly recommend you check it out. It's tasveergharindia.net. But they kind of analyze visual imagery through the key fields of A, the social and performative life of mass-produced images, B, the histories and everyday lives and voices of producers, disseminators, and consumers of mass-produced images, and C, the various techniques of visuality / media of visualization, for instance, ritual or theatrical performance or political spectacle. So next. So for this exploration, we're kind of broadly distinguishing 2 types of posters. The first is film and commercial posters, which are generally driven by a profit motive, and 2 are political posters for mass mobilization. But also, like, a lot of posters don't confine themselves to either or distinction. And a lot of the posters we're going to show today exist within the spectrum of these 2 characterizations, which we'll talk more about soon.
So we're starting with, we thought it'll be a nice, what we're going to be talking about is a lot of things, and there are lots of back and forth between political and commercial posters. So we'll start with this simple poster shop in Bangalore, run by this man called Ramachandraya and his son Raju. They create posters on a lithograph machine using only 5 colors for films, for local small theaters. And they often design things in hours and produce hundreds of posters within a day for like 5 to 6 films. And so the beauty of it is that a lot of their posters are very intuitive, almost unplanned, and working within the constraints of their colors and their grid. So a lot of their aesthetic considerations come from what is available to them. And they make posters not just for Kannada films, Kannada being the language of Bangalore and the state of Karnataka, but they also make posters for Hindi films, English films, Tamil films, and basically most Indian films that play. So this example, this is a Tamil film called Iron. And as you can see, the main lettering is a direct sort of replication of the actual poster. And they basically replicate the actor's face and everything from the actual poster. But in the poster, we see 3 different languages. We see Tamil, Kannada, English kind of intermix together, which is basically a really good articulation of what Bangalore is like as a city. And another way in which they kind of pull recall from the films themselves is to use the logotypes of the actual poster. For example, this film called Thoranai, which is a Tamil film, they've kind of redrawn that logotype in their own version, which completely differs from the actual poster. And here, very interestingly, the Spider-Man film from 2012, this is a Kannada dub of Spider-Man, so the title is in Kannada. And as you can see, he has recreated the Spider-Man logotype, that typefaces style, onto Kannada letter forms, which is a sort of ingenious little detail that exists to kind of pull that recall between the two. And also the texture of the suit that he's created. So it's this wonderful sort of marriage of necessity of the tools that are available and international aesthetic considerations. And they make hundreds of posters, like we mentioned. These are like for Mission Impossible, Harry Potter, and Kanchana, and a bunch of like local films. And they follow this very distinct style of this visible grid in the background and hardcore typography. This also kind of has a visual link to the very famous circus posters that we see all over India, also produced on lithograph, also produced on the same kind of constraints. And what we will see here a lot in the posters that we're going to see is that the constraints of production make the aesthetic considerations, really, and not really, a lot of the aesthetic considerations don't come from the designer's kind of style, but the style is dictated by what is possible by the machines that are used to reproduce these posters. Another thing we wanted to talk about is not just the making of the posters, but also where they're exhibited. In 2008 Sasikumar film Subramaniapuram, which is a legendary film, highly recommended to everyone here, there is a tiny little clip where they show in a small village near Madurai how posters are advertised, how films are advertised in the village. As you can see, they are pasted on this kind of this mount that is then put on wheels and then taken all over the village all day. So that's this guy's job, is to take this moving poster around the village so people know where to watch the film and what new film has come out. So it's almost like taking the poster as this tool that functions as, you know, the static thing that is pasted on a wall and making it a sort of moving, completely repurposing what a poster is defined as.
The proliferation of posters in India can be seen widely in urban spaces as a democratized way of advertising, promoting, or activation. For example, here we see a pillar by a flyover in the old city of Ahmedabad, covered with multiple posters in Gujarati, with half being circus posters and the other half being advertisement of a nursing course, competing for the same visual real estate.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to India, you've probably seen the phrase, you know, stick no bills painted on walls in a city. And this is often reflective of the tension amongst, you know, the logics of private property, commercialism and advertising, but also the geographical turf of political parties, which we will expand on more in a little bit. So yeah, this slide shows a wall with the phrase no stick bills. And we decided to name this presentation as a play off of this grammatically uncharacteristic phrase that's extremely ubiquitous in urban visual, in the urban visual landscape.
The next is an example of a rural, a way in which posters get used. This is a unique instance where this is a photo of Jhargram, a village close to Kolkata, taken in 2009. Poster culture thrives in rural areas as well. Here is an Indian farmer steering his bullock cart along the street, displaying Communist Party posters in a village close to Kolkata. Normally, posters are on a wall, but this instance pops out because they're positioned horizontally on the main road so that every bypasser who takes this route will take notice of them.
And we can also see the very, the high stakes and political implications of posters. For example, these are members of the right-wing outfit Hindu Sena, which is kind of an offshoot of the RSS, founded in 2011. And here they're burning posters of Priyanka Chopra on the streets. And you might recall that they've done similar things to photos of Rihanna and Greta Thunberg during the farmers' protest. But they're particularly burning her poster because she appeared in a TV show that showed Indian nationalists trying to frame Pakistan for a terrorist plot. So there's multiple layers of irony here, given that, Priyanka Chopra is not by any means a threat to the status quo, and on the contrary has very nationalist politics, but these posters serve as a way of implying political implications and a reactionary politics to what they perceive as a threat. And here we can see also two Malayalam posters. So this is from the state of Kerala in the south. And the one on the left is produced by the Communist Party of India, CPIM, and the one on the right is the Democratic Youth Federation of India. But it's very common in India to not only see politicians' face in political posters, but also like communist figures themselves, using actual photos of them or illustrations of them. So on the left, you have Lenin, Engels, and Marx explicitly. And on the right, you have Che Guevara, which is very common. And yeah, so some will go a little bit into why the poster on the right is funny.
The funny thing about that poster is that this is not the actual photo of Che, but it is the Puerto Rican actor Benicio del Toro posing as Che in the 2008 biopic Che Part 1. Interestingly enough, the photo used is the actual film poster, showing the intertextuality of poster design.
So it's almost like a poster within a poster. And we don't know if the original designer knew that this is Benicio del Toro. It's possible that they Googled Che and they got it, So another thing is the kind of replication of socialist imagery and image styles, which was a very popular ideology, especially in the South, where secularism is stronger than in the North historically. So this is the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, which is the DMK, a very important party in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. And the leaders of the DMK in history, Periyar, Anna, Karunanidhi, and currently Stalin, are shown in an exact kind of replica of the four faces of the Soviet poster, which is very famous. That includes Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin, and is often, more leaders are added. There's one iteration with Mao, there's one iteration with Kim Jong-un, and so on and so forth. And another very important aspect to this is that here's where we kind of here's where we see an interlink between commercial and political posters, because in Tamil Nadu, the film world and the political world are often mixed. For example, Karunanidhi, who was a chief minister, who was the longest serving chief minister of Tamil Nadu, these many terms since 1969 till 2011, was a film writer. And he started off as a party worker in the DMK, promoting rationalist, socialist, anti-caste ideas. And he used those ideas as a writer in films to create propaganda for social reform. And M.G. Ramachandran, who was also a chief minister of the AIADMK party, was a film star. And so was Jayalalitha of the same party. This is them when they were young. Karunanidhi as a screenwriter, MGR as a star, and Jayalalitha as the main, female star of the time. And often Karunanidhi would write the films in which these two actors would act in, and a lot of these films would promote rationalism, scientific thought, anti-caste ideologies. And a lot of the films really had a big impact in society in creating a sort of, going against some of the more traditional, conventional, conservative ideas. And these are two posters for films that the first one, Parasakti on the left, was written by Karunanidhi. And it is a very famous film, one of the early Dravidian strongly ideological films, in which a character is kind of, the main character is seen oppressed by religion, by caste, by all the social evils of India at the time. And as you can see, even the poster, it is seen, Shivaji Ganesan, who is the protagonist, is seen being oppressed from all sides by all of these social evils. And on the right, Namnadu, which was a film that MGR made just before he announced that he was also getting into politics and he was going to start his own party. And this film was actually a litmus test to see his popularity among the people. So in the film, he is a person who is oppressed, again, by the social evils like zamindars, landowners, corporate world, and so on. And he kind of fights back and becomes this leader of the people. So the film is sort of a litmus test. He released the film, and then people really reacted well, and then he entered politics and then won the elections. So in the poster as well, we see that he is in the state, and Jayalalitha is, this is Jayalalitha, who would in the future become a chief minister. So often films and posters were used as political tools in the 40s till the 60s. And now this is the current state of the DMK, which is in power right now. Karunanidhi's son, MK Stalin. And another thing we see in the aesthetic kind of development of political posters in the state is the colors of the flag find themselves in the typography. For example, the colors of the DMK flag is black and red. And you see all of the typefaces are color-coded as black and red, split in the middle. And this is not just an aesthetic consideration. It comes from how Tamil is constructed as a language. Tamil is often constructed in 3 tiers, and most of the letters have a 3 tier system. So you can split it in half, split it in 3. So it's a very interesting kind of visual aesthetic that is born out of the natural linguistic form. And you can see this throughout. And this has a great design function as well, because even if there are instances where there are no leaders present, no pictures present, you can still see who the poster is for. So easily you can distinguish in Tamil Nadu which political party has which poster, because the type will be colored in the flag colors. For example, this is the website, the current website of the DMK, and they have actually edited the CSS to have this feature. So these are actually fonts and not like images. So we see this idea coming from the early Dravidian sort of design aesthetic from the 1950s till today. It's still maintained as this really successful identity tool. And we also see it kind of memeified in the current world. So in the second year of Stalin's regime, a party worker put up this poster, which alludes to this very famous film poster of Billa 2. Billa is a gangster movie. So I don't know why, I don't know if this is like a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just an interesting interplay of stardom, and they found a photo of Stalin where he is wearing glasses. So, and more importantly, that very famous iconic kind of logotype of Billa is used in this poster, but it is split in half with the 2 colors to easily identify the party. As you can see, the Hindi posters, which are rare, but they do have posters in Hindi, it doesn't work so well, the splitting, because Hindi and Devanagari script isn't constructed in the same way as Tamil. So here it's literally just split in half, and it's not really well done. But in Tamil, it's very, very natural, and it happens kind of in a way that is not questioned. And the same kind of system is followed by other parties as well. This is the ADMK, which was a split, originally was a faction that split away from the DMK. So their flag is very similar. They have white in the middle, so black, white, and red. And the same is included in their typography, but it's not as successful because the white band often makes it illegible. And this is another party, the Vidudalai Sirithaigal Katchi, which is an offshoot of the Dalit Panthers, an anti-caste Ambedkarite party. And their colors are blue and red, and the typography follows blue and red. We'll come to the Dalit Panthers later in the presentation, but it's just an idea of how it works in Tamil Nadu. And this is unique to Tamil Nadu, but it is kind of used in other states as well, but it came from here. So the kind of political real estate that posters have and the power that posters have is beyond just information dissemination. And two films explore this really well. One is Pudupete of 2006 by Selvaraghavan, and Madras of 2014, directed by the legendary Pa Ranjit. In Pudupete, it is, so as you know, in India, it's not a two-party system, it's a multi-party system, which means there are hundreds of parties in every state, from micro parties to large parties. So a way in which geographic, what do you say? What is the term, Priya? I don't, how they're distinguished
turf,
by
like
party?
the geographic turf, political turf. Yeah.
Turf marking in areas in Tamil Nadu is often done by the use of posters. So small political parties usually control certain areas, and the people who live in those areas are usually supporters of that party. So that area is cordoned off with posters of that party on the walls. One of the things that happens often is wars break out between parties and gangs because one gang would post posters of their leader onto the enemy territory. And it often is a way to mark public spaces as yours in terms of ownership. So in this film, Pudupete, there is an initiation ritual for this young gang member that he has to, with the, you know, it's kind of his initiation into the gang to go into the enemy territory and paste their posters. And they get information that their the enemy turf is empty and they're all gone for an event and they're not there. So they can go paste these posters. But then in the scene, what happens is those guys come back. And there is a confrontation that leads to almost a sort of murderous riot, which is very interesting because this whole thing happened because of posters. And we often don't see the kind of weight that posters carry anywhere else in the world as it is done here. In Madras, this is explored in a much more matured way, I would say, not just as a plot element. In Madras, they talk, Ranjit's films often talk about the power of space and ownership of space and real estate through ideology and identity. So in this film, there is a wall that exists between two areas. One area supports one party and another area supports another party. And this wall is in the center. And it has the portrait of one of the party's leaders. And the whole story of the film is that the other party wants to claim that space. And it's about the kind of wars that happen around that and how the people kind of stand up to this and so on. So public spaces take on a completely different role because of the posters and the ideologies that are represented in those posters. So we go way beyond typography and graphic design to make posters into tools of ownership and tools of marking. So we thought we'll go into a bit of history in terms of poster design. So
Yeah, speaking of these two films and how politics and film kind of intersect in this like specific media of poster, I would start by showing early film posters. They implemented both pictorial and typographic visual depictions as seen here. The need for marketing regional Indian films came about due to the insistence of English newspapers only advertising Western-made films. Production of handbills and film posters came with the arrival of cinema in the Indian subcontinent, and they were primarily used to like showcase regional films. And as you can see here on Diler Jigar, even though the film is silent, you can see the depiction of multiple scripts. It's plural, it's multilingual. Next slide, please. The early language of the poster comes from the Raja Ravi Verma-esque painterly style, where you see a reclining painted heroine. And again, I want to emphasize the multiple existence of scripts and so on. What's also quite interesting about early Indian filmmakers is that they wore multiple hats. They themselves were the poster designers, directors, set designers, One such figure is the Marathi filmmaker Baburao Painter. He was trained as a fine artist, but transitioned into directing silent films and later started his own studio. He wrote his own screenplays and shot in three-dimensional space rather than the earlier stage painting, which was the convention in Indian movies at that time. And in 1921 and 1922, he published the first Indian films and he founded his own company and started making his own films. And he went to even design his own movie posters. Publicity was not alien to Baburao's many talents. And you can see he made his own handbills and posters with complete film details and photographs of the set. But he painted this poster of a film that he directed himself. And next slide, please. Two slides I want to show of the first Indian talking film are these two posters from Alam Ara from 1931. They were first talkies, as they were called, by the Indian director Adarsh Irani. What's interesting is this is actually a lost film, and this film, the reason we know this film exists is through the posters and the collateral that exists of that film. The other interesting thing is that the film was specifically publicized as a Hindustani language film, which is an archaic form of current Hindi. We know that this film, the posters kind of also emphasize this novel technology. Like on the left there, you can see the film equipment and the fact that it's a talking or like a living, breathing, 100% talking film, you don't get to know a lot about what the plot is. You see the actress and the equipment, which is interesting. It's kind of akin to current popularity of CGI in Hollywood, where the new imaging technology kind of dominates over what the plot is actually about. This is the other poster where you kind of get a sense of a little bit of the plot, but again, the typography emphasizes that it's actually a talking, singing, dancing film, and we don't really know what the plot actually is.
So we have one question from Ashna who says, any info on how the Baburao paintings were transferred to print? Were they printed through stone lithography?
I believe they were paintings, but then, yeah, they were printed as lithographs. Like the originals were paintings, yeah.
Thank you.
This is a poster of an early Tamil film, Paval Kudi. The poster depicts the heroine, again, in this stylistic signature Raja Ravi Verma style. It's a lot more portrait oriented. It's stages and it's framed rather than depicting an action, which evokes a specific aesthetic of early theater. And then next we want to show a chronology of visual language through different eras of Indian cinema. This is a rough visual chronology on how film posters in India evolved. A lot of earlier films ranged from purely typographic handbills to then later painted scenes, as you see with Sati Savitri. And then kind of more of a theatrical photographic stage scene as here in Devdas. Next slide. The later you go in the 60s and 70s, a new era of visual depiction dawns where the glorification of film star lends to a highly dramatic, expressive, and colorful visual style. And then next slide. In the 80s and 90s, we see explicit use of photo collaging. And then in the 90s, highly produced photo shoots and the breaking of the fourth wall where the actors directly look into the viewer starts to come about. You also want to mention that film studios like directors and like Dharma and Yashraj, they were specifically targeting international audiences with these films. So you see a lot of references of what is like fashion shoot or like street culture, especially in the costumes and the posters as well. And then next we see the 2000s, where what happens is the films start to get a lot more self-referential. They start to play more with the surface of the poster, like here you see in Dil Chahta Hai. The poster for Devdi is interesting because it's a reenactment of, or like an adaptation of Devdas. And it's so self-referential that like the tagline is "Come Fall in Lust." So Shiva, if you go back, it is a direct like parody of Come Fall in Love, which is the tagline for Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. And then next slide, please.
So sorry to interrupt. I have another question. Is there evidence of Indian film posters being influenced over time by Hollywood posters or other film cultures from around the globe?
Yeah, there is, and we're about to talk about that.
Okay.
Maybe we can do question. I mean, we can collect all the questions and kind of talk about them at the end. I think that would.
Because I think a
Sure,
lot of
yeah.
questions are coming. We're about to answer them. But
Okay.
what's really interesting about Devdas is it's one of the most adapted narrative in Indian cinema. There are approximately 16 adaptations of the single Bengali novel. Here we see 3 adaptations from 3 different eras of cinema. The posters clearly depict the stark changes that take place in the visual conventions.
Yeah, so I'm going to also talk a little bit about form in film posters. So especially the use of the female form. So the use of the female form is a site of layers of meanings and implications, and often reifies patriarchal gender norms. So the portrayal of female heroines evolves over time, very dictated by those norms and morals. So for example, on the left, you have the very famous film Mother India by Mehboob Studios. And this was made in 1957, so approximately 10 years after partition. And the actress Nargis's, she has a very anguished expression in which she tries, basically the filmmaker is trying to depict her as a virtuous and providing character that reflects the broader ideal of a self-sacrificial woman that holds the value of idealized nationalism of the Indian nation state post-partition. And then on the right, you have, on the contrary, you have this film, Nele Pe Dela, which is a film about 2 brothers who become thieves. And the film depicts kind of a woman wearing a revealing outfit in the Indian context with cards and a gun, symbolizing stereotypically sinful behavior. So we see here how these film posters and how women are represented very much falls into the patriarchal Madonna whore binary of the representation and stereotypes of women. And yeah, Shiva's going to talk a little bit about how that continues to change as time goes on.
And over time, there are filmmakers so during the 1950s, post-partition, 2 things happened. One was a return to conservatism on one side, and one was a kind of breaking of that and trying to find a new path forward for the newly independent India. So what happened was the mainstream commercial cinema was one, and then there was a parallel cinema, as it was called. And the main proponent of parallel cinema was Satyajit Ray, the Bengali author who wrote, directed, scored all of his films, and he also designed his own posters. He was a well-known graphic designer before he became a filmmaker. And he challenged a lot of the mainstream depictions of women in his films. Often his films centered around female protagonists, which is still a novelty in Hindi cinema and Tamil cinema. So these 2 posters for Charulata and Devi, both female-centric films, the depiction of women is not in the Madonna whore binary, but without a sort of male gaze or sexualizing the woman. And this continues in his future films as well. This one is Mahanagar. Again, another thing that we will notice in Satyajit Ray's films is very strong compositional, typographical, typographic compositions, being that he was a typographer from a family of printers. So his great-grandfather was a printer, typographer, and illustrator. His father was a writer and illustrator. So many generations of artistic lineage comes together in his films. And one thing that Ray kind of brought into the poster lexicon was the dependence on the logotype. So the film's logotype almost functions as an identity, like a brand logo that is then applied on different poster designs. So it's almost like this thing that connects various different versions of posters. So both of these posters are designed by Ray. And as you can see, the only thing similar between them is the protagonist's face in that composition and the lettering of the title. And I found this really nice recreation of the poster for the Criterion version of the release, where they simply redesigned the logotype from Bengali to English, but retained the style. So this is a very interesting sort of localization from Bengali to English of the lettering. And we will see a lot more of this happening in the presentation. So Ray designed Ray designed all the posters for his own films, and he often designed posters for when his assistants went on to make their own films as well. He often challenged composition, depiction. So his posters were often against the norm of showing stars and action in a very kind of cinematic way, but often he would design posters as what poster medium is supposed to have. And very rarely use photographs.
Right. I would like to add that they were like quite moody, or like we're focused on depicting an ethos rather than like a literal depiction.
And then we come to the kind of Bengali school of film of the 60s and 70s, where Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, and Typotheque presented the three kind of pillars of Bengali cinema at the time. All of them were prominent leftists. From the whole, who formed the whole spectrum. Mrinal Sen, who was a hardcore Marxist, Typotheque, who was a lot more on the radical side. So we see politics entering cinema, not in such a literal way as Tamil Nadu, but in a more ideological fashion in Bengali cinema. And of course, you can't be a Bengali artist if you're not wearing glasses, and if you're not brooding, if you're not a smoker. And we'll see the stereotype happen a lot more.
I also wanted to mention, Shiva, that up until now, the mainstream, or like a lot of the mainstream cinema, has always kind of prioritized romance, fantasy, and family-centered cinema. And then now we start to see a new way of storytelling, like visually and narratively.
And these guys were heavily influenced by the Italian neorealist movement of Vittorio De Sica, and they sort of wanted to depict India and the kind of in a realist fashion. So a lot of their films fall under the social realism style that was globally sort of taking shape at the time, with Akira Kurosawa on one side, and the Italians on the other, and the French on the other. So there was a kind of conversation between the Nouvelle Vague of France, the Bengali school in India, and Akira Kurosawa in Japan. So it was an era where aesthetic and narrative and stylistic conventions were shared, and sort of, each was inspired by the other. Mrinal Sen's films were often really, a lot more harder and more realistic and more brutal than the films of Satyajit Ray. And his posters were designed by Abhijit Gupta. A friend of mine is his nephew, who was kind enough to share his information and photograph. He had recently passed away. He was the designer for all of Mrinal Sen's posters, and he kind of followed in the tradition of the Bengali typographic style, but brought in a sense of that Marxist realism within the style. So as you can see, if you look at Satyajit Ray, a lot of the posters are kind of loud. They're kind of really compositionally strong. They're really kind of iconic. But a lot of Abhijit's posters were subtler. They use less colors. They're a little more brutal. They're a little more sort of, like the films that they're depicting. And then parallel cinema kind of moved from Bengal to the Hindi cinema as well. And one of the main proponents was Govind Nihalani, who created the legendary parallel cinema streak of the 80s that started with Aditya Satya. Now we start seeing the influence of American graphic design in the Indian landscape through parallel cinema. So as you can see in Aditya Satya, they used the very famous typeface Avant-Garde Gothic, which had just released at the time, which was designed by Herb Lublin, who was kind of the most influential graphic designer of the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And very interestingly, we see that the Latin or the English title is designed in avant-garde, And then the Hindi is a lettering piece that is created to kind of, what do you say, create an avant-garde in Devanagari. And they've done these very interesting things like breaking up the conjunct, like the th and the ya, instead of connecting them, breaking them up to create that sense of space that we see in avant-garde. We see more of the influence of Herb Lublin and the American school in parallel films of the time, in Utsav especially, which follows a Tom Carney's kind of lettering style that is very, very popular in America at the time. And we can see that same thing localized in Devanagari script. So when you put these two together, the communication is the same, whether you read English or Devanagari, which is a uniquely Indian design constraint, if you think about it. And we see more of that influence in other parallel films, Bhumika by the legendary Shyam Benegal. Here we see the use of the famous ITC typeface Bengat Caslon, which was all the rage at the time with the swashes, and it promoted that 70s kind of excess, which was interestingly used in this poster. So what we're seeing now is a sort of conversation with the rest of the world, when before India and Indian cinema was pretty much isolated to its own sort of realm. And around this time, as more film theaters started propping up, more films started traveling to a lot more smaller villages and spaces. What happened was the need for posters to be localized. So the kind of what happened was the importance of the logotype became a lot more than the poster itself. For example, these two posters for Drokal, also a film by Goen Irani, which was remade in Tamil as Kurudi Punal, highly recommended film. But so Drokal, as you can see, the logotype is very, very specific. It functions as a logo, as an identity. And even though in the film and the poster on the right, you can't even see the star, it's very clear what the film is. The art direction, there's a lot of kind of, what do you say, sort of match art direction in both, and it can be used in other formats as well. So the logotype becomes the central element. It almost takes the place of the central star or the actor or actress. And this is clear more than anything in Tamil films. These are two posters for, this is a poster and the record for the Tamil film Vikram, which uses this really cool early digital Tamil lettering, which is significant because the film was also the first Indian film to use the computer for music and for graphics. So to use the early computer language in the logotype is also a very relevant idea. And these are three posters designed by three different theaters. So usually what happens is the film reels are sent to all of these theaters in rural and urban Tamil Nadu, and the theaters will commission their own local artists to design the posters. So what happens is the production house doesn't retain that much control over what happens. So they usually, what they would do is send the logotype. They would send publicity photos, like screen grabs from the film and the film reel. So each poster is designed by local artists near the theaters, wherever they're being produced. So the logotype then becomes the connecting factor along with the actor and the poses and so on. So these are posters designed by completely different people in different places for their own context and their own dimensions. Like, for example, this theater needs a landscape poster. These theaters need portrait posters. So it's all kind of a collage. And here we see the central importance of the logotype and the typography. And so this kind of became a thing. The logotype and typography became its own sort of art form within the poster format in Indian films. From a really specific, like Sholay, for example, is so famous as this kind of brick breaking style, to something like Devar Magan, which is in the bottom, that the logotype itself includes the actors. So it almost becomes like the logotype itself is the poster. There is no need for any other kind of design. So this art form is stretched over time into its own sort of really specific art form with its own styles and rules and logic. And nobody does it better than the Bengalis. The Bengalis have really used the form of the logotype more than anyone else. And a lot of these are designed by Ray himself. I wasn't able to find the exact credit, but these are all Bengali film lettering. I mean, I've never seen films with such incredible titles in any other language. And finally, with the logotype, I just wanted to show this poster for this Telugu film, which has the typography in this step format. And in all the posters and publicity, they use that step format, which I thought was very interesting and unique. I've never seen that before. And for the 50 days, for example, usually when films run for 50 days or 100 days, and these milestones are usually commemorated with a poster that comes in the newspaper or on the streets. For the 50-day run of this film, they chose a completely typographic poster, which I thought was amazing. So now we come to the sort of international proliferation of Indian cinema. And so.
Right, like we saw how posters kind of get reinterpreted within the domestic market, but there's also a lot of curious or like quiet, like beautiful interpretation that happens when Indian films start to get international releases. Bollywood cinema became very popular among Soviet audiences during the 1950s, with over 200 Indian films being imported into the Soviet Union between 1954 and 1991. It was a reflection of kind of the geopolitical relationships between India and other countries. Next slide, please. Raj Kapoor became a really a huge icon. His film Avara became the second highest grossing film of the Soviet era. And Raj Kapoor is really interesting because his films often have, he's always depicted as this, he plays this archetype of the underdog, the happy-go-lucky everyday man, the proletariat, who's kind of like remaining his like charm despite of like systematic oppression and adversity. He remains like cheerful and honest, and his films became extremely popular abroad. This is another film of his where he depicts, he plays the Joker, and this is a Soviet version of the same film. And you see how the same poster becomes filtered through an existing language.
And shout out to the curator Jahan Bakshi, who collects a lot of these posters and has an incredible Instagram called Posterphilia. Highly recommend it for everyone. Yeah, sorry. So.
And then next, the other iconic Indian film, Mother India, and this is a Czech version of the same poster. Next slide, please. And then we wanted to mention this series because it's the same film but being interpreted throughout different countries. But what's really notable here is the introduction of the Soviet social realist painting style, which is very visible in these posters. And then I wanted to mention Shabana Azmi because she becomes also another icon in how she gets depicted in Soviet film posters. This is the Indian version, and then next to it is the Hungarian version. And whenever they depict Shabana, they always show this distinct large bindi, and it becomes a very iconic motif in all her films. It's also notable because her father, Kaifi Azmi, was a communist playwright as well.
And then usually, so the left being strong in film is quite natural. But Bimal Roy, a few directors were outwardly socialist, like Bimal Roy was this legendary Bengali filmmaker who made films in Hindi, who got the legendary communist artist Chitta Prasad Bhattacharya to design the poster for his film Do Because Zameen, which is possibly the only kind of commercial work that Chitta Prasad did. And most of the Indian left's visual language is really the invention of Chitta Prasad. And it was very interesting to see him design a poster for a film, which was clearly a socialist realist film.
Right, you also see him again with like glasses and a cigarette. Oh, yeah, a typical Bengali artist.
Yeah, so then to kind of bridge the gap between film and politics again, I kind of talked about in the beginning the spectrum of types of posters. And so we're going to move to New Delhi, and explore the work of the Safdar Hashmi Memorial Trust, or SEMAT, which was founded in 1989, shortly after the assassination of communist playwright Safdar Hashmi. So that's Safdar Hashmi on the left, and he was born in 1954. He was a student of Delhi University and joined the Student Federation of India, which was the student offshoot of the Communist Party, and also the Indian People's Theatre Association, which was the artistic wing of the Communist Party. And Hashmi then was one of the founding members of the Jananatya Manch, or Janam, a theater troupe in New Delhi that specialized in leftist street theater. So here you can see on the right, that is Janam performing. And the collective would write and perform plays that covered a myriad of issues, such as labor exploitation, peasant rights, unemployment, sexual violence, and trade unionism. And during their time, Janam performed over 4,000 plays at nearly 100 locations across the country. And they constructed a really innovative and dismantleable mobile theater to take proscenium plays and perform in working class neighborhoods. And the structure can fit about 600 to 700 people. So you can see at the right how many people could fit to see the street theater performance. And then on January 1st, 1989, Janam began a performance of their street play Halla Bol during the Ghaziabad municipal elections. And during the performance, the troupe was attacked by workers of the Congress Party, and Hashmi was murdered, unfortunately. If you go to the next slide. This is an incredible photo, in my opinion. It's Safdar Hashmi's funeral, which was a couple days after he was killed. And this photo was taken by Ram Rehman, who actually designed a lot of the posters that I will be showing. And this was on January 3rd. And this funeral was attended by over 15,000 artists, political activists, intellectuals, and workers in honor of Hashmi. So he kind of became this incredible symbol of the left, and especially art on the left, artistic movements on the left, against authoritarianism and fascism, growing Hindu nationalism. And basically he became a symbol that highlighted the role of street theater and arts in the revolution as a tool of politicization. So if you go to the next slide. So in honor of Hashmi, two things happened. The first was the formation of SEMAT, the Safdar Hashmi Memorial Trust. And the second was the commemoration of April 12th, which is Hashmi's birthday, as National Street Theater Day across the country. So yeah, here you can see a lot of paraphernalia of SEMAT, pins, poems, publications, literature. So it was not just confined to street theater, but SEMAT kind of included a bunch of different types of art. If you go to the next slide. So I wanted to highlight, this logo. So this is the Janam logo designed by artist Orjit Sen, who also designed a lot of the posters I'm about to show you. But you can see the star formation of people holding hands. And and so now we can move on to kind of looking at the posters that were designed in honor of National Street Theater Day. So there's something very unique about these posters, which I'll kind of mention at the end after I show a few. But on the left, you have this first poster from 1999. It's basically a collage of a bunch of newspaper headlines related to incidents of Hindutva violence and growing anti-Pakistan sentiment that has been stoked by paramilitary groups such as the RSS. And this is, a few years after the Ayodhya riots, after the Babri Masjid was destroyed, and SEMAT took a strong stance in their artistic expression against the communalism. And so you can see at the top, resist in like very large red typography, along with a silhouette of Safdar Hashmi flying a flag, which actually that symbol becomes something that's replicated in a bunch of their posters from now on. So these posters were made in honor of National Street Theater Day. On this day, a bunch of street theater troupes would perform plays related to building consciousness about the issues, about communalism, about labor exploitation. On the right, you see another poster from 1994 a much more simple poster by Parthiv Shah. If you go to the next slide. On the left, I think this is also by Parthiv Shah, but I can't find the year. But the left one I love because it actually combines several quotes, art, and poems from a bunch of artists and poets on the left. This one in particular has a poem by Mrinal Sen, who Shiva mentioned earlier, the Marxist Bengali filmmaker. And he actually wrote a poem in honor of Sardar Hashmi. Every time I chant your name, I renew my pledge to stand for life and freedom, for justice and human dignity. And the famous poem also by Martin Niemöller, first they came for the communists, etc. There's also a poem by Shah Alam, the Mughal emperor. And at the top left, you can see a poem by Pash, who was a major leftist poet in Punjabi literature in the 1970s. On the right, this is a poster designed for the 2010 National Street Theatre Day by artist M.F. Hussain, who's a very famous artist. And thematically, it's about love and exile. And I particularly like this poster, because it features the words of Palestinian professor Edward Said. It's kind of small, I don't know if you can see it, but on the right, there's a column. And this is from his work, Reflections on Exile. And in this excerpt, he talks in dedication of Pakistani leftist poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who famously wrote the poem Hum Dekhenge, which has become a song of resistance in the last few years. And who some of you might be familiar with. So there's just really incredible conversation happening transnationally with these incredible leftist figures, artists, poets. I can even read what it says at the bottom right. To see a poet in exile as opposed to reading the poetry of exile is to see exile's antimonies embodied and endured with a unique intensity. Several years ago, I spent some time with Faiz Ahmed Faiz, the greatest contemporary Urdu poet. He was exiled from his native Pakistan by Zia's military regime and found a welcome in sorts of strife-torn Beirut. The three of us sat in a dingy Beirut restaurant late one night while Faiz recited poems. After a time, he and Iqbal stopped translating his verses for my benefit, but as the night wore on, it did not matter. What I watched required no translation. It was an enactment of a homecoming expressed through defiance and loss, as if to say, Zia, we are here. Next slide. These are some more. So on the right, this is a poster from 2003. And I can't find the specific designer, but this is the year of the imperialist invasion of Iraq by the United States. And this is a specifically anti-war poster, which says, no war, peace chahiye, we want peace. We can see how internationalism was a huge theme in Somnath's work. And on the left, you can see a poster from 1996. And it's almost like it's a letter that's been reformatted to be used as a poster with the names of artists, intellectuals, writers, and prominent figures on the left to protest the rise of anti-secularism in India. So you can't really see the names, but there's really prominent names on that poster. There's Moloshri Hashmi, who's Sardar Hashmi's wife, Javed Akhtar, who's a very famous actor, Irfan Habib, a very famous Indian historian, Mani Ratnam, famous Tamil film director, Shabana Azmi, famous actress who we talked about before, Anand Patwaran, a famous documentary filmmaker. So it was just basically a celebration of art and using art as a political tool. But what's very, very special about these posters is that each of them contain a blank spot. So if you kind of parse through, you can see, like, for example, if you go back one, you can see in the middle of the left one, there's a space, in the side of this one, there's a space. And this space was actually, it emerged from the idea of making one poster each year in commemoration of the National Street Theatre Day that could be sent all over the country to hundreds and thousands of street theater groups across India, so that they could write the specific date, specific time, specific place that the street theater performance would be performed. So these posters not only fostered an internationalist sense of solidarity through their designs, but they were extremely utilitarian and with the incorporated space so that any theater troupe could write the location and time of their performance in honor of National Street Theater Day. So there's a really amazing sense of democratization and mass dissemination that's embedded in so many of these posters. And they've also brought together the creative collaboration of so many people on the left. So these are other works of Somnath. This is the one on the left is 1998, a tribute to German poet Bertolt Brecht, featuring his famous quote, both in Hindi and English: "In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times." And the one on the right is, Som, do you want to talk about the one on the right?
Yeah, sure. Right. The poster on the right is actually of a concert series that they used to hold. And it's called Anhad Garje, and Arijit Sen made the poster. What's really interesting is that they would perform explicitly music from Sufi and Bhakti traditions. And in this performance, they sang a lot of poetry by Kabir and Amir Khusrau. And what's really interesting is that it kind of ties into their like communal or like anti, like the religion being kind of both Hindu and Muslim. And so there would be a lot of folk singers, but also prominent classical music singers like Shubha Mudgal as well.
Cool, thanks. Somnath also made a lot of infographic posters, and it's hard to read, I know, but I can send you the link so that you can zoom in. But just to describe these, the one on the left is from 2018, and it's a poster that highlights the farmer marches that took place in various states of India. And so I know some people might know about the massive farmers' protests that recently happened in the past few years. But farmer protests are not unique. Farmers protest very often. So the one on the left was produced in February of 2018 by farmers demanding loan waivers and higher minimum support prices for their crops from the central government. And true to Somnath's style, it also provides context of earlier cultural responses to farmers' crisis. So this was also designed by Ram Rehman, who took the funeral photo. And it's a poster with a collage of images, including illustrations by the political artist Chittaprasad Bhattacharya, who we just saw, photographs by Sunil Jinnah of the Bengali famine of 1943, posters of films like Do Bigha Zameen and by Binoy Sen, and graphics by Arijit Sen. The one on the right is a 2017 poster that pays tributes to moments in revolutionary history. So 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny, anti-colonial against colonial British rule, 1917, the October Revolution, also known as the Bolshevik Revolution, 1947, independence and partition leading up to 2017. And then I want to, these are other posters created by Somnath. The first is by M.F. Hussain again. The next is by Akbar Padasri, and then Manjit Bawa. And then I want to go into highlight these posters by Arijit Sen again. And this is through Janam in New Delhi, which was the street theater troupe. And they did these in collaboration with the Freedom Theater in Jenin in Palestine. So Janam went on tour with Arijit Sen during the summer of 2016. And so here we see he designed these really beautiful posters that combine very important revolutionary iconography of the Palestinian resistance struggle against Zionist oppression. Here we see the kafia, a symbol of Palestinian resistance, being incorporated into the shape of a nest, and also into this really beautiful grid design, and the colors of the Palestinian flag in the typography.
One of the interesting things about this poster series is his very conscious linking of Palestinian iconography and Indian iconography, which we will see here very clearly.
Yeah, so here we see on the left, you have this map. I feel like people have seen this map. It's of basically throughout the years, how the theft of land has shrunk Palestinian land. And what Arijit Sen does is kind of reappropriate this image, and with the last image being full of red poppies to represent a liberated Palestine. And on the right, you have the very famous Handala, who's the little boy designed by Palestinian cartoonist Naji Al-Ali. And I feel like people have seen this illustration of this little boy across insignia, posters, visualizations of Palestinian resistance. And in the original photo, he has his hands behind his back, and it's to represent the non-cooperation of, the so-called peace talks or any sort of two-state solution. And it's a revolutionary defiance. And so the logic behind it is the only time he'll look towards us is when Palestine is liberated. And Arijit Sen has designed another little girl, an Indian girl, Madhubala, to hold hands with Hamdallah. So it's a really beautiful visual representation using, combining Indian and Palestinian visual iconography. And this is a mural that Arijit Sen did in Palestine. So you actually have Sattar Hashmi illustrated on the left, along with Ghassan Kanafani, Hamdallah, and just more visualizations of Palestinian resistance.
And then we come to sort of while Samad was creating posters in the left tradition to kind of disseminate information, at the same time, the women's movement was also growing from the 60s onwards in India. Women's movements and groups started to kind of go throughout the country in rural areas to educate people about rights. And so it became a very strong movement over the years. And designers and posters, of course, were a very big part of that. One thing that one collaboration that we wanted to highlight was the studio that was formed by designers Jogi Pangal and Shiva Chachi in the 80s called Life Tools. It was a Delhi-based studio that primarily worked with social groups. And one of the groups they worked with was this women's organization called Saheli. And a lot of their posters that they designed for them were meant for areas in India where illiteracy was very high. So they had a very specific constraint to design posters that talk about the oppression of women, but without any words. So a series of posters that they designed that were completely wordless and that were very simply illustrated in a very urgent way. It was a very interesting way to kind of create simple iconography, to use symbols that were familiar, that go beyond language and writing, like these posters. So a lot of these posters are conversation starters almost. They're not for information, they're not for telling you a specific message, but more of a conversation starter, more of a kind of a sort of, what do you say? What's the term for it? Like a symbol of solidarity. Yeah. And throughout the history of the women's movement in India, posters have played a very, very strong role. And a lot of the posters are very heavily visual and not very typographic. Even on the one on the left, it's beautiful how the illustration and the typography almost feel like one layer, and it's not like a separate layer. And a lot of these images, even if you can't read, you will definitely kind of understand what it's about. Like the one on the left, which is by this group called Vimochana, I believe in Bangalore, was a very simple kind of poster about women's union and combining the two symbols together. And the one on the right is just one of the greatest posters I think ever designed in terms of the visual power and narrative kind of strength. And a lot of posters deal with concepts that are familiar to audiences, like sati and social evils that are misogynistic, that are seen as normal as such. All of these posters are, there's been a project to kind of archive these posters and create a visual narrative over a kind of chronology by the publishing group Zuban. And 2 books were published about these posters. One, Our Pictures, Our Words, by Lakshmi Murthy and Rajshri Dasgupta, which is a fantastic book that basically talks about the history of the women's movement in India through the posters as the markers of time. So they're differentiated by theme, like, for example, domestic abuse, rape, rights, the Shabano case, and so on and so forth. And all these posters that were designed for each theme and kind of arranged chronologically. So you get a sense of what the history of this movement was. And also, it's just a great book about graphic design that doesn't talk about graphic design, you know. And the book on the right is also a collection of the posters. And they have a website called posterwomen.org, where they've compiled all of these posters free that we can see online. At the same time, so here we want to talk about the idea that India is obviously a massive country with so many subcultures and movements. And every movement has their own history of posters. And as much as we'd love to get into all of them, a lot of the movements are not as well documented, and also we don't have that much time. But we would like to kind of point to these areas for everyone in the audience to kind of also take a look in their bookshelves and their kind of houses and whatnot to see if the history of these posters exist. For example, this one, the Dalit Panthers poster is really popular, designed by Subhash Avchat for the Dalit Panthers in Maharashtra, which was a party that, a social group that was started, inspired by the Black Panthers in America, for India's oppressed Dalit caste by the first group of Dalit Panthers, J.V. Pawar, Raja Dhale, Namdev Dasal, and I'm forgetting the other revolutionary. So they designed this incredible poster, and then the poster was recreated this week by 2 very well-known and 2 of the great artists of our generation, Siddesh Gautam and Rahi Punyashloka, both from Ambedkarite anti-caste movements. And they've recreated these posters in their own really specific styles. So there's a kind of lineage of the Dalit Panther visual language of self-empowerment that has kind of come through, which they did through their kind of publications and posters. So Priya, you want to talk about?
So these is basically in the 50s and the 60s, there was a surgence of basically these things called little magazines, and they were publications that printed literature, poetry of specific movements. So there was a surge of Dalit literature that gave way to magazines that the Dalit Panther Party specifically produced, called Rava. And these are kind of the covers of multiple publications, each highlighting anti-caste Marathi literature and art.
Arjun Dangle was the other leader that I forgot. And so these posters, so there was obviously a lot of production of posters and publications from this movement that, and Raja Dhale, one of the founders, was an incredible artist and illustrator in his own right, and he kind of led a lot of the visual production. And that lineage kind of comes through in the anti-caste films, resurgence of anti-caste films in the Tamil cinema by Ranjit and his Neelam group. So blue is the color of Dalit resurgence and self-empowerment, and it is prominently featured in the posters of Ranjit's films. For example, in Madras, blue is very popular, and Neelam, his production house, the meaning of Neelam is blue, is the Tamil word for blue. And in Sarpata Paramara, his latest film that was released in 2021, which is about a boxer from an oppressed community who kind of who breaks through these oppressive structures. And you can see that his boxing gloves are in blue. And the same iconography is used in other great anti-caste films of the past few years. This is Priya Prabhakar by Mari Selvaraj. Again, the iconography is incredibly clear. And one other thing, I love this poster, the main film poster for Priya Prabhakar, because it doesn't utilize any of the actors or stars, but instead uses the dog as featured in the film. And the dog is kind of, I don't want to spoil it, but is a metaphorical symbol very important symbol in the film. And when this film released in Chennai, when I was there, it was really interesting because there's these massive posters of this dog. And it was quite different from every other. I mean, that was enough to distinguish this film from all other films on the walls.
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to end off by talking about kind of contemporary poster designs. This is a poster I actually, the right is a picture that I took when I was in Kolkata 3 years ago because I was really intrigued by both the film festival and the design. And I emailed them and asked basically what was the reasoning behind the design. It looks like a vulture with two surveillance cameras, and they explain that thematically each year has a different theme, and this year's that particular year's theme in 2019 was on surveillance of queer and trans bodies. So really beautiful poster designed by Sumatra Mukherjee. And yeah, I think that it goes to show kind of how the lineage of poster history has informed the contemporary designs we see today.
I wanted to mention that the use of posters has taken a new meaning in the last 4 years, as many young artists and designers are very actively creating unique posters to aid the various protest and resistance movements that have been taking place in contemporary India. I feel like just in the last 2 years, we saw the biggest and the longest protest held by farmers and also the members of like anti-CAA laws protesting against that. And we also see the shift to digital platforms that have given posters a newfound relevance. And we recommend you look at this site, which is kind of a collection or an anthology of all the work that's been done in the last 2 years in India. And a lot of like young and talented artists and designers have contributed so much of their time and labor.
And also just wanted to mention that like poster making has become so much more ubiquitous due to the shift to digital platforms. It's so easy to create visuals now. And I think putting those tools in the hands of like really brilliant young designers who wouldn't usually get their work published is really incredible.
And with that, we'd like to thank everyone.
Yeah, the three of us just wish to continue shedding light. And like the gaps are like bigger and deeper, which we couldn't kind of cover in this poster history talk. And we look forward to receiving more poster histories from all of you. So you can please get in contact. There's Priya's email at the back. And may the voices of dissent always persist.
Thank you all for such an amazing and enriching presentation. I know that it's not easy to talk about the multitudes that exist in India, but you've all done it, you've done it quite incredibly in the short amount of time that we've had. I know that we're at time, but there was a question from Joseph, who asked if you could comment on the visual identity of BJP and if and how they see posters and graphic design playing a part in the rise of Hindutva ideology in today.
The first thing I can think of is like a really good essay on Tasvirkar about how the Hindu right uses posters and especially masculinity to convey their ideology. I can put it in the link if
there's also some interesting pieces on how BJP and the right wing have basically appropriated the fist, which has usually been known as a symbol of resistance, generally on the left or progressivism. And so the BJP is now using that to, promote their violent ideology. So that's also like the appropriation of leftist visual iconography is definitely something that the BJP is doing. And Som sent a good article on that.
Another question that we got frequently was that, do we know of any female designers, type designers, who were working around the time of like the 1950s from some of the posters that we've seen?
women designers, like we mentioned, 1950s, I'm not so sure. I mean, of course, the thing is, with the history of graphic design in India, the biggest thing, the discussion is the lack of documentation. Most posters, publications are designed by people who didn't train in design, who were probably trained in layout, art, in magazines and so on. So a lot of the problem was that I think a lot of the great designers had no idea they were creating such incredible design, and they were just doing their job. So in that sense, a lot has gone undocumented. For example, in even the film titles that we showed from the 80s, I have no idea who designed them. And it'll take a long time to kind of ask these questions or find the people, which we really want to do. For example, with Abhijit Gupta, who designed the Mrinal Sen posters, I was actually talking about it, about Mrinal Sen, to a friend, and he happened to tell me that, oh, I had an uncle who designed his posters. And that's how I kind of found out about this incredible graphic designer. So there's a lot of undocumented things. So I'm sure there were great designers. We just don't know them. But one very prominent woman graphic designer who worked in the space was Shiva Chachi, who is now a very prominent photographer who shows her work in the Tate and things, and who's a great artist. So her work for Saheli was quite groundbreaking. And I'm sure there were other graphic designers who were women. We just need to find them.
I think that's also, just to add to what you said, I think that's not uncommon. Especially when it comes to like political and film posters, because you also had like a couple of different groups working on the same posters, I would imagine. Like, for example, when we were looking at the film posters for You Won't Bleed Me, it wasn't like one person who was working on it. You'd have typeface designers, you'd have photographers, collage artists, etc., illustrators. So I think you're absolutely right about the documentation, but also like the collectives that worked on individual posters as well. With that, I think we can round out our presentation. Thank you so much again for such an incredible evening. This was really amazing, and I hope that we can continue to bring programming like this.
Thank you so much for having us. And hopefully, this is a kind of request to everyone. Send us posters, because every subculture in India has its own history of posters, like we said, but we just need to see them. So if you please send us.
And thank you all for coming and taking the time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
And a recording of this presentation will be made available to all registrants after we finish. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.